The knock came before sunrise, hard enough to rattle the cedar doorframe and shake dust from the porch beams. A deputy stood where my father's flag used to hang. Behind him, a survey crew hammered stakes into soil my family had worked for a century. They were carving lines through my land, while I was still tasting sand from a war I hadn't fully left. Pain hit when the deputy said the word foreclosed. Promise came when I felt my jaw lock. Someone had made a mistake they were going to spend the rest of their life correcting. I came home to a hollow house and the smell of wet concrete drifting from what used to be my kitchen. The old barn roof sagged from waiting. My great-grandfather planted the first apple trees here when horse carts ruled the road. I had planted nothing yet. I was 38, carrying a duffel bag and a head full of noise. The deputy kept his eyes low. He said the land was now controlled by a residential association I had never joined. They claimed unpaid assessments while I was deployed overseas. I remember thinking that paper was fragile, but it could still crush you if enough of it piled up. By noon, I learned the name of the man behind it. Carson Hale. He ran the new subdivision across the creek. Former development broker. Polished smile. Tight handshake. People said he spoke in contracts and listened in profit. The association bore the same stamp. Tall fences, gravel paths to clean for boots, mailboxes aligned in rows. I stood at my fence with my old mug cooling in my hand and watched strangers measure off my pasture as if it were a blank map. A yellow notice flapped against a post where my father once nailed up wind chimes. I drove to Hale's office in the strip center by the highway. Pizza oil and nail polish fumes fought in the hallway. He kept his desk bare except for framed permits and a little brass gavel he tapped when he talked. He said the land had accumulated road costs and community fees. Said notice had been sent. He said service did not excuse obligation. His tone stayed calm, but his eyes studied me like inventory. Men like him believed authority grew from paperwork, not from consequence. 2 days later, a sheriff's car blocked my driveway. The deputy apologized with his shoulders while he handed me a paper that told me not to step on my own soil. Hale arrived 10 minutes after, slow and smiling, telling the deputy he appreciated professionalism. Internal thought rage felt clean at first, then it felt heavy. I slept in my truck that night, beside a cedar fence built from deadfall. My father dragged home with rope and stubbornness the next week turned into inspections. Noise complaints about my tractor that hadn't run in a month. Soil tests over rumors of contamination. I watched men in gloves scoop dirt my grandfather once crumbled to judge rain. At night I spread records across the bench in the barn. Deeds, plats, survey sketches, handwritten transfers that smelled like old books and sweat. I found a filing requirement buried so deep that most folks missed it. Agricultural preserves here carried protections if the landholder acted fast. Someone had acted faster than me. I asked around town. A retired clerk told me the association's corporate standing had lapsed. A farmer down the road said Hale had leaned on him too. The pattern began to show in the quiet places. Predators didn't roar. They whispered and waited for soft moments. The break came through a woman named Ruth Calder, lawyer who knew watershed law and spoke like she was counting steps on a ladder. She saw what Hale had built. The subdivision sat over a spring system that fed half the county wells. His plan for a commercial recreation project would pour chemicals uphill from every kitchen tap. One injunction froze the work. A second filing questioned his authority to act at all. The third named the forged boundary shifts for what they were. Fraud travels fast once you call it by name. When the county scheduled a hearing, Hale panicked. Crews arrived before dawn to tear into the orchard. Diesel smoke rolled across leaves my great-grandfather once brushed frost from with bare hands. I stood in the dirt and felt the ground shiver. Then one machine bit into water. Clear and cold, it surged up through limestone like a wound that would not close. The foreman swore and cut power. The flags went up by noon. Wetlands protected. Federal? You never saw it, did you? I told Hale later. Because you never looked at the ground? The hearing filled the courthouse like a harvest crowd. Boots, uniforms, worn purses, work shirts. The judge listened. Engineers spoke. Accountants laid out missing money. Neighbors described threats delivered softly, like favors. I described a flag taken down without asking. Hale unraveled on the stand. He talked about growth and progress and troublemakers who wouldn't adapt. He forgot that progress without consent was just theft wearing a suit. The ruling restored my property before lunch and ordered everything else examined. Internal thought justice sounded quieter than victory, but it lasted longer. If you have ever seen a line drawn through something that was never for sale, share this story. Someone else might need the map before the stakes go in today, right now. The injunction slowed the machines, but it didn't slow the man. Hale shifted tactics like a dealer hiding cards up his sleeve. County trucks rolled in next. Health inspectors. Environmental officers. Each wore the same tight look of someone sent on an errand they already hated. They tested my well. They tested my stock pond. They photographed manure like it was contraband. The irony wasn't lost on me. My cattle drank cleaner water than most of the houses that now judged them from behind vinyl fences. By the third inspection in 4 days, even the lead inspector sighed before he spoke. Someone keeps filing complaints, he said, eyes on the clipboard. We have to answer every one. That was how paper won wars now, not bullets. Forms then, the real pressure arrived. A notice of public hearing to reclassify my land as blighted residential. The word blighted was a blade. It meant the county could step in. It meant development under force. It meant Hale didn't plan to lose quietly. At night, I paced the cedar fence with the old mug steaming in my hands. The spring frogs sang like alarms. My father's flag stayed folded on the table. I kept catching myself listening for rotors that were no longer there. I had survived places where maps were guesses. Losing over a map drawn crooked felt like insult layered on injury. Ruth dug while I watched. She followed the money through filings that smelled like dust and desperation. Development loans tied to association fees. Emergency road charges ballooned just beyond what most families could pay outright. Debt stacked on debt. Hale didn't just build houses. He built traps that looked like neighborhoods. The trap grew teeth when I found the first trail camera footage. A figure bent over my tractor under moonlight. The glow of a phone screen flashed across nervous hands. The timestamp hit deep night. By morning, sugar crusted inside the fuel tank like evidence begging to speak. Sabotage wasn't just damage, it was intent. 2 days later, anonymous health complaints stacked up. Dead fish, poisoned wells, diseased cattle. All lies, but each demanded time, tests, money. Bureaucracy doesn't care if you're innocent. It only cares if the box gets checked. The break came from an unexpected place. A quiet retired teacher who lived inside the subdivision called me from a blocked number. She spoke like she was still in a classroom. Precise, controlled. She had been tracking missing funds for 2 years. Notebooks thick with handwritten tallies. Assessments charged, but never spent. Repairs billed, but never fixed. Corruption leaves fingerprints. You just have to dust long enough. We met at a diner before dawn. Bacon smoke hung thick in the air. She slid a folder across the table with a steadiness that came from decades of confronting liars half her size. He threatens people, she said. Quietly. That afternoon, Ruth uncovered the hidden spine of it all. The association's corporate status had been inactive for years. No authority. No legal standing to collect a single dollar. Every fee Hall had taken was technically unauthorized. Kings without crowns still bleed. The subdivision stirred that night. Porch lights flicked on like a constellation waking up. Doors cracked. Conversations leaked into cool air. People started to compare notices. To match numbers. To add what hadn't added up before, Hale responded with speed. A restraining motion landed on my doorstep before sunrise. He claimed I was unstable and dangerous. Claimed my service years had cracked something inside me. Claimed the community needed protection from me. When control slips, men like him reach for character assassination. I stood in front of the mirror that morning longer than I needed to. Internal thought I had learned in distant. Mountains that silence could be louder than shouting construction returned the following night in the dark. Machines rolled without permits this time. No markings. No posted orders. Just noise and headlights chewing into my orchard again. I called Ruth. She came fast. The cameras rolled. The water came up again. The spring revealed itself fully now, undeniable as blood on snow. By morning, federal flags ringed the site like quiet sentries. The live feed spread faster than rumors ever had. Phones buzzed across the subdivision like cicadas in season. County officials arrived, red-faced. Hall called, then called again, then stopped calling. By the end of the week, more neighbors reached out. A former bank officer traced the loan web. The retired teacher revealed the books. A mechanic found irregular upkeep bids that pointed straight back to Hale's pocket. Every road cost came home to the same address. We gathered in the barn for the first time after sunset. Hay dust floated in the lantern light. Boots scuffed packed earth. The folding table wobbled under the weight of evidence. This wasn't my fight anymore. It belonged to everyone he had touched. Ruth laid out the paths forward with the calm of someone sorting tools before a storm. Injunctions, audits, environmental triggers, emergency homeowner vote. Each carried risk. Each carried leverage. Hale made his move at dawn. He tried to push a quiet settlement through intermediaries. Cash offers filtered through layers of messengers like smoke from a distant fire. He wanted the spring sealed, the orchard cleared, silence bought. Desperate men bargain with pieces of their own future. By noon, state officers stood on the road with clipboards and cameras. The machines fled without ceremony. Oil stains marked their retreat like footprints. The subdivision gates stayed closed. The clubhouse doors were locked. Residents were told it was for their safety. Tyrants always confuse safety with obedience. The rebellion found a gymnasium that evening. Folding chairs, bare floors, the echo of voices that had never planned to rise together. The retired teacher called order with a whistle she once used for field days. People spoke. Numbers were read. The vote moved like a wave once it started. Outside, rain began to fall over the orchard. The spring overflowed into new channels as if the land itself was drawing different lines now. I stood beneath the cedar fence and watched water trace paths no survey had ever mapped. Some boundaries only appear when pressure breaks the surface. The night ended without cheers. Just a quiet certainty settling in like fog. The official hearing loomed at morning light. Evidence waited in boxes. Warrants waited in folders. Hale waited somewhere, his phone silent and his empire folding inward. And for the first time since the morning, the deputy knocked. I slept without boots on. The courthouse steps filled before the doors ever opened. Tractors lined the street like quiet steel witnesses. Veterans stood beside teachers. Mechanics beside retirees. The rain from the night before still clung to the stone, leaving everything slick and reflective. I stood with my old mug warming my hands, steam curling into cold air. My father's folded flag stayed tucked beneath my arm like a promise that refused to wrinkle. Inside, the courtroom felt too small for what it was about to carry. Hale arrived late, sharp suit, hollow eyes, a man trying to keep gravity from noticing him. His attorneys stacked binders like sandbags. The judge entered without ceremony. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Hale's side spoke first. They called me absent, irresponsible, delinquent. They dressed theft in the polite language of fees and notices. They framed development as community service and painted resistance as instability. His strategy was simple. If he could not erase the land, he would try to erase the owner. Ruth rose without hurry. She introduced the filings like a surgeon naming instruments. Incorporation lapses, forged boundaries, unauthorized collections. The retired teacher stepped forward and opened 2 years of notebooks. Numbers spilled out that refused to lie. The former banker traced the loan stack like a ladder built on air. The engineer spoke of water flow and chemical drift in terms that didn't need emotion to terrify. Then came the timestamps, the sabotage footage, the sugar in the fuel, the night cruise without permits, the spring uncovered beneath crushed roots, the federal flags. Truth doesn't shout when it arrives. It just takes up space until the lies have nowhere left to stand. Hale lost his stillness on the stand. He spoke faster. He blamed subordinates who did not exist. He tried humor where dignity had lived. When questioned about the sealed environmental report dated before the irrigation lines were cut, his mouth worked without sound for a moment. The gap between what he claimed and what the calendar proved swallowed his defense whole. The judge recessed for 20 minutes that felt longer than my entire deployment. The room breathed out together when she returned. Her ruling moved clean and direct. The property transfer was void. The assessments were invalid. The association's authority was suspended. All evidence of financial and environmental violations would be forwarded for criminal review. The land was restored to me without condition. Hale stood when it was over and laughed once. It broke in the middle. Outside, the weight shifted, not into celebration, into steadiness. Federal vehicles waited at the curb. Officials spoke in low voices. Phones vibrated in pockets across the crowd like nervous birds. Justice rarely feels loud when it finally arrives. It feels heavy and certain. By evening, word spread that Hale had tried to leave the state with what remained of his cash. He didn't make it far. The airport cameras saw him long before the gate ever would. The charges that followed sounded like a ledger of every shortcut ever taken. With other people's lives tied to the margins, racketeering, fraud, environmental, crime, embezzlement. The subdivision didn't empty. It exhaled. The retired teacher was elected to lead what remained of the association before the week ended. Open meetings replaced closed sessions. Bids were posted where everyone could see them. Receipts became required, not optional. Transparency restores faster than force ever can. The golf course never broke ground. In its place, neighbors planted rows, beans, tomatoes, squash. A shared garden rose where greed had planned to pour chemicals. Children learned where food came from instead of learning how to look away. My farm changed too, not in its bones, only in how openly it stood. Conservation status locked the land against future seizure. Restitution payments replaced what the machines had destroyed. Volunteers from the subdivision arrived with shovels and gloves. The orchard was replanted with heritage cuttings traced back to the original stock, the night we set the last sapling. I set my father's flag back on the porch post. The breeze caught it gently this time. No one knocked. No engines idled. The land sounded like itself again. Months later, letters began to arrive from places far from our fence lines. Veterans facing silent filings, elderly owners buried beneath emergency fees, families standing at the edge of the same quiet theft. We answered what we could. Ruth traveled more. The retired teacher held workshops. The banker volunteered his ledgers. The barn didn't just store tools anymore. It stored knowledge. I had once thought survival meant standing alone. I was wrong. On a calm evening late in the season, I sat on the porch with my old mug, cooling fast. Cletus leaned against the cedar rail and watched the cattle settle. Fireflies stitched light into the grass. "You didn't just save a farm," he said. "What did I save?" A line people didn't know they could hold. The annual gathering grew without effort. A simple harvest dinner at first. Then music. then scholarships for rural students. Then partnerships with veterans who wanted land not for profit, but for purpose. The subdivision families cooked beside us. Children ran between rows that would never become streets. The land taught me something the war never did. That repair could outpace destruction if enough hands picked up the work. Hale's name faded from town conversations the way storms fade after they pass. Damage remained, but the fear did not. People learned how to read notices, how to demand records, how to speak together before someone else decided in private. The traps lost their disguise. On the anniversary of the first knock, I walked the property line at dawn. Frost traced the new fence wire. The orchard breathed quietly. The spring ran clear where machines once tried to bury it. I stopped by the cedar post and touched the grain worn smooth by my father's hands. Nothing worth keeping stays still. It stays defended. The last letter of that season came from a man I had never met. He faced the same quiet filings 3 counties over. He had gathered his neighbors before the first stake touched ground. They had forced a halt before the blade ever moved. "You showed us the pattern," he wrote. "We broke it early, folded the letter and slid it with the others beneath the flag." The lineage of the farm no longer rested only in soil. It traveled in people. And as the sun cleared the ridge and set the fields glowing, I understood the simple truth that had taken me the longest to learn. They had taken a boundary for me. We gave millions back to the idea that no line should ever be drawn in secret again. Power never fears anger. It fears coordination. Predators prosper when families stand isolated. They retreat when memory, law, and community stand shoulder to shoulder. My great-grandfather fought droughts. My father fought machines. I fought paperwork sharpened into weapons. All 3 battles were won the same way. By refusing to leave the ground. If you've ever faced an HOA fight, a zoning threat, or a quiet legal shove meant to move you without permission, drop your story below. Someone else may be standing at the same fence right now without knowing it yet.